here we go. Hello, and welcome to the Blitzburgh Coverage Podcast. I just want to thank you guys all for tuning in, wherever you're watching or listening from. Let's start off with some introductions. This is the Blitzburgh Coverage Podcast. I am your host, Kurt Mackey. I've been a fan of this team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, for about my whole life. Was born in a towel, embedded into this nation. I breathe, live, and die with this team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I first started off as a Steelers fan because of my father, who grew up during the 70s dynasty, and started watching when I was younger. My first game I watched was the Super Bowl in 2005. The first Super Bowl we had won since the 70s against the Seattle Seahawks, a game in which we had won 21-10. I started avidly watching it more in depth in about 2010 when I was in middle school, as I am a younger, newer Steeler fan compared to some of the past Steeler fans who grew up being able to watch the great era of the 70s, the bad era of the 80s, the better era of the 90s, and now here we are in modern day. I consider myself the biggest fan on this planet of this team. I'm a Steeler historian. My friends will vouch for it. You ask me a question about any game since 2010, I can give you a correct answer. I've watched every game on Sundays, Mondays, Thursdays, even Wednesdays during the COVID season, if you remember. We played the Ravens there because it got COVID shifted from Thanksgiving to a Wednesday, almost 6 days after. I have watched this team play every game since about 2010. Many highs, many lows, and I am here to share that with you. What this podcast is going to entail. On this podcast, we will cover the Steeler games during the season, of course. We're going to review each game, preview the next game, just analyze the team, recap how things went, what went wrong, what went right, what stood out, how the games went, how the flow of the game went, everything in depth, in detail, because that is what I do. I speak the truth. I tell you what my eyes tell me. I tell you what really goes down. Because a lot of these fans nowadays in the great sport of football really don't have a clue as to what they're talking about. They're speaking out of their end. They're not really calling it for what it is, and that's not how I am. So I'm here to tell you the truth, here to speak to you about what really goes down and what's really going to happen in this season. Now, when it comes to the offseason, we will obviously talk about Pittsburgh, how their free agency draft, how their offseason is going, but I am not opposed to talking about trending topics, what's going on, big trades, moves, etc., other teams and such. And so with this podcast, we're going to cover this team because I live, breathe, and die with this team. I go in depth, in detail. So I think that brings us to today's first topic of the Blitzburgh Coverage Podcast / show. Whether you're watching or listening, today we are going to talk about Who is going to win our division? The AFC North. A division in which consists of 4 teams. The Cleveland Browns, the Baltimore Ravens, the Cincinnati Bengals, and yes, the Pittsburgh Steelers. For years and years, the media and all these little off-season writers have preyed on our downfall. Every year they do it, they come up with some ridiculous narrative as to why we are going to finish last in this division. Which, mind you, has not happened in over 30 years. Think about that. I've never seen us finishing last in my lifetime. And so, I think we're going to start out with who I believe will finish in 4th place in this division for this upcoming 2023 season. I think it's pretty obvious. They finished in last season. For me, it's got to be the Cleveland Browns. They're the paper champs. They've been the paper champs since 2019. A year in which, OBJ was the big off-season acquisition, Baker in year 2, blah, blah, blah. Yada, yada, yada. Kareem Hunt, offensive line, blah, blah, blah. Myles Garrett, blah, blah, blah. Garbage. They're the paper champs every year because until they actually do something on the field, residing in a higher than 2nd or 3rd place finish in this division, they'll remain in 4th. Obviously, as far as additions this offseason, they've added Elijah Moore, who was a pretty decent receiver for the New York Jets. Deshaun Watson, we know all about him. I was a big fan of his coming out of Clemson in that draft, 2017. I knew the dude was going to be a baller out of Clemson. I've seen it with my eyes. And he was good in Houston, no doubt in my mind. He was awesome in Houston, kept them afloat, brought them to the playoffs a few times. Had them, mightily up against the Kansas City Chiefs. But that's for another day. He came back last year, definitely looked rusty. You got Deshaun Watson, Nick Chubb, still a very solid offensive line. You lose Kareem Hunt. You got Amari Cooper, in which a trade you finessed the Dallas Cowboys. Donovan Peoples-Jones, a Michigan alumni. A defense led by Myles Garrett, who somehow gets ranked above TJ Watt every year, which is insane to me. That's for another topic. But for me, they will reside in 4th place because this is a very tough division, and I believe they'll probably finish in 4th with a 9-8, 8-8, 8-9 type of record. Now, Deshaun Watson returns to that Houston form that we have seen in the past, then I might be slightly nervous. But until then, the Browns will stay the Browns. And that's facts. They will stay the Browns. There's no reason to believe that's going to change until we see it. So for me, I have them finishing in 4th place. I'm not saying they're going to be a bottom feeder. This is obviously before injuries happen and such, training camps. As it is early July, so a lot of that is left to be told. Time will tell. But for now, we're going to go with the Cleveland Browns finishing in 4th. For our 3rd place team, the team I believe will finish in 3rd place for this upcoming season, I am going to pick the Baltimore Ravens to finish in 3rd place in the AFC North. Offseason acquisitions consist of Odell Beckham Jr., Zay Flowers, who was their first round selection. Let's see, who else? I mean, it's really about their biggest acquisitions, to be honest with you. Departures. They lost Chuck Clark to, I believe, the Jets, and he actually just suffered a season-ending injury, so that's unfortunate. They also lose Marcus Peters, who's a free agent. He hasn't signed nowhere, so he could still sign back, but few starters. But the reason why I have them finishing in third place, it's not because I think they're going to be trash. I think they'll be better than Cleveland. And they only finished one game ahead of us last season. Now, I know last year does not have anything to do nor pertain with what is going to happen this year. But that's what we're speaking off of. So that brings me to Lamar Jackson and why he is a top 10 quarterback, but we are his kryptonite. And that's why I have the Ravens finishing below us. The past 2 years, Lamar Jackson has not finished the second half of those seasons. Last year, I believe the biggest reason why he didn't was because he wasn't going to play until he got that contract. Selfish, but I understand why. Him coming back and potentially suffering something along the lines of what Kyler Murray suffered was not worth the risk without that contract. So I get it. Selfish, yes. But in today's game, it was not worth the risk. So maybe he was hurt, maybe he wasn't. We'll never know. My gut was telling me that, honestly, I think he was I just don't think he wanted to come back until he got that contract. But Lamar Jackson against the Pittsburgh Steelers, as a starting quarterback, has one win. Let's take a little, visit to the past. 2018 first round pick. Last pick of the first round. Ravens trade up with the Eagles. So he didn't really start until the end of that year. And when he played us, he kind of just played a couple snaps, but mainly it was Flacco. So we ended up sweeping the Ravens that year. 2019, we played Lamar real early in the season. I want to say it was week 4. In which, very close game, very typical Baltimore Ravens, Pittsburgh Steelers type of game. A game which the Ravens won in overtime, 23-20, I want to say, due to a ridiculous roughing the passer call that we got that extended a drive for them to be able to kick a field goal because Justin Tucker is just ridiculous. Sent us to overtime. Juju fumbles because of a Marlon Humphrey punch. Ravens get the field goal and beat us. That was during Lamar Jackson's MVP season. That was his only only win against us. He played terrible that game. We clamped him. And when you look at the statistics of every game we played against this guy, we are his kryptonite. We have a great amount of sacks on him. He's never killed us in the rushing game. The dude has more interceptions and turnovers than touchdowns against us. 2020, he played us once. Both teams, we were undefeated. I think they had one loss. 2020, we beat them in a very close ball game. A game which the Ravens suffered. Lamar had like 3 turnovers. A pick 6 to Robert Spillane. A fumble near the goal line towards the end of the game. And we ended up beating them. Lamar missed the second game because he was hurt. Actually, no, my apologies, because of COVID. He was one of the many players that suffered COVID and caused that game to delay all the way up until Wednesday of the next week. So, he only played us 1 year that year, 2021. The Ravens at the time were a first seed. They played us real early December, and we end up beating them by 1 point because the Ravens missed on a 2-point conversion play to Mark Andrews. In 2022, well, actually, my apologies, 2021, the second matchup he missed because he was hurt. Ravens go on, stumble, miss the playoffs completely. We get in. We get throttled by the Chiefs. That's for another story. 2022, Lamar doesn't get the chance that we don't get the chance to play Lamar. Instead, we end up playing Tyler Huntley twice. Mind you, in the first game he gets hurt, so then their third string, I think Anthony Brown or some third stringer came in. We lose the game because of Mitch throwing multiple interceptions, of course. But we beat them the second time, so Lamar's only beaten us one time as a starter. Now let's get back to why I believe they're the third place team here. I do have questions about their defense, and quite frankly, I don't think their offense is going to be as good as everyone thinks. Odell Beckham is not the same Odell Beckham, okay? The man has not been the same since he left New York. He had a nice little resurgence there the first year with the Los Angeles Rams, but then he unfortunately suffers another torn ACL during the Super Bowl, in which he was actually doing pretty well. Zay Flowers, he seems like just another Marquise Brown clone to me. He's a solid wide receiver too. He's real small, speedster type of guy. Mark Andrews is really the only vertical threat here that I'm concerned with. If I'm being honest, Mark Andrews is really the only one that gives me concerns. And their other receiver they had suffered a season-ending injury last year, Rashad Bateman. So you're talking about 3 first-rounders with Odell, Rashad Bateman, and Zay Flowers. It's also going to be interesting to see how different their offense is ran now that they don't have the same offensive coordinator they've had for the past couple of seasons with, what was his name, Greg Roman. A very run-oriented type of offense, which, I mean, call it for what it is. It got Lamar MVP. A very good season 2019. But in the playoffs, they come up small. Lamar is a great athlete. Definitely one of the best runners of the football I've ever seen. But when it comes to throwing the football, he's very inconsistent. He's very hit or miss. And that's why I don't. The Ravens will be always a thorn in our side. They're our best rivalry, no doubt. No question out of these 4 teams. Biggest rivals. Most respect between these 2 squads. But to me, I just have them in third. Who's going to be the pass rush? You lose Calais Campbell. You lose Marcus Peters. You have a solid secondary with Kyle Hamilton, Marlon Humphrey. They have another, David Ajabo's in year 2. Let's see what he does. He was a first-round talent out of Michigan. Let's see what their defense does this year. You got Raekwon Smith, who was a big trade for them. Extended him as well. Questions. Every team has questions, but I believe really with them, I'm curious to see how this offense is going to look and who's going to be their pass rush. The Ravens always have a good pass rush. Someone's got to step up. Who will it be? So due to the Lamar sustainability questions and the fact that we own this guy, for me, that's why I'm putting them in third. Now that brings us to the top 2 spots of this division. and who I think will finish in second. Just speaking with my gut here. For the second place team for the AFC North, we are going to reside with the Pittsburgh Steelers finishing in second. We'll go through the record. We'll do a record video prediction for topic for another day. But I really want to say, the reason why I believe we will finish in second, there's still a lot of unproven things with this team. The talent is there. We cannot, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I believe we can finish in first place because we look at the way we line up and stack up against these teams in our division, the way these matchups are going to work. I believe we have the team to finish in first. We've owned the Ravens. We've owned the Browns. The Bengals have owned us, though, for the past 3 seasons. However, we played them very tight and competitively last season, with those 2 ball games obviously being a split 1-1. Week 1, we should have whooped them if our offense actually had a freaking heartbeat. Defense was clamps. Picked off Joe Burrow 4 or 5 times. Minka saved the day. TJ Watt saved the day. Defense played phenomenal. Second game, offense just let us down. Second half. First half, played great. Second half, choked. Big time choked. The reason why I have this team finishing in second, because of a few things. A lot of young talent. Rookies are a little unproven. But I really think this is going to depend on a couple things. Obviously, health. But Kenny Pickett has got to take a year 2 jump. A year 2 leap. We don't need him. I don't need Kenny Pickett to throw 300-plus yards, 3 touchdowns every game. We don't need that. We need Kenny Pickett to just manage the game. 200-ish, 250-ish passing yards or so. 2 touchdowns, maybe interception. 1 touchdown, no interceptions. And I believe with the way this team is set up, with this offensive line, with the acquisitions we've made, at left tackle, drafting Broderick Jones, bringing in Nate Herbig as a guard, depth guard, Isaac Seumalo as a new starter, next to Mason Cole, next to James Daniels, Jakuma Okorafor. These are all younger players getting better. Dan Moore Jr. will be a nice depth piece. I'm very curious to see who's going to win that battle with Broderick Jones and Dan Moore Jr. That is going to depend. That's going to dictate a lot of things, especially early on in this season. You add in a Darnell Washington, who's basically an extra offensive lineman. I mean, this dude is just as big as the offensive lineman. 6'7", 260. The dude's a great run blocker. Him and Broderick Jones on the same side will be a problem. We can play we're going to play bully ball. That's what people don't understand. We're going back to our roots. Smash mouth football. Smash mouth. Smash mouth with the Naj and Jalen freaking Warren, an undrafted free agent. The Naj has gotten 1,000 yards plus rushing his first 2 seasons without a good offensive line. People don't understand that. Every time the dude had the ball. He was getting constantly already getting hit, tackled. He'd break a tackle. There'd be one guy there. He'd be fighting off a dude right when he got the ball. Because the offensive line could not create any holes. But you could see down the stretch, especially during the second half of last season, things were starting to change. We were starting to get 100-plus yards rushing. The offensive line was starting to play better. We were starting to gel, which had a lot to do with the fact that we were very durable and suffered no injuries on our offensive line. Fun fact. So when you look at the acquisitions on offense and still young developing players, with Kenny Pickett in year 2, Najee in year 3, Freiermuth in year 3, Deontay Johnson, still a solid wide receiver 1. We just need him to start going forwards, not backwards. George Pickens, underrated. Dude, didn't get enough targets last year, in my opinion. Year 2, if he can work on his route running ability and separation, we got something cooking. Adding in Allen Robinson, a veteran presence there. Giving Kenny Pickett another red zone option is big time. We have made many little moves that will help this offense hopefully translate to more points being scored, less field goals. Not opposed to scoring, but let's get 6s, not 3s. Let's talk about this defense. This defense is going to finish not only top 10, not just top 10. I believe this is a top 5 defensive unit in the NFL and can potentially finish number 1. I don't know if they will, but I definitely am going to boldly say, not even boldly, I know they're going to finish top 5. After that Bengals game last year, after that bye week, we didn't allow 20 points ever again. I understand we don't play the best of quarterbacks, nor the best of offenses. But that also had to do with TJ Watt being back. So that brings us to this lineup this year. We're talking about Alex Highsmith on a contract year. Dude had 14.5 sacks. Tied for first in forced fumbles. Cameron Hayward, an aging player but still has played consistent. Great run stopper. Great pass rusher. Still a 10-plus sacks last year. Larry Ogunjobi, a solid defensive lineman. Lacks pass rush but is a good run stopper. I'm good with him there. Defensive tackle / nose tackle. I'm curious to see if Keanu Benton will be the starter. I believe if it's even close with him and the Watts, the Brandon Fielkos. If he's even close with those dudes, you got to start him week 1. Because he offers a lot of pass rush potential. Another good run stopper. A very underrated player from Wisconsin. TJ Watt, outside linebacker for the other side. The best defensive player in the game today. We got him healthy. I know he's going to miss probably a month because he always misses something, but it's because the dude plays so hard every snap and our defense has been on the field way too much. Way too much. Too many 3s and out. Too many 3 and outs, man. That's the biggest thing. If our offense can just get the defense off the field, fresh, we'll be cool. Let's go to the secondary. Minkah Fitzpatrick. DeMonte Kazee, who will be stepping in for Terrell Edmonds in that strong safety role. Going to be curious to see how that transpires. You got cornerbacks. Levi Wallace from last year. You lose Cam Sutton. You make the acquisitions of Patrick Peterson, who's probably going to slide into that slot role. And then Joey Porter Jr. as the other outside corner. 6'3", tall, lengthy, solid in man-to-man press. A little grabby at times, but that'll be we'll obviously going to work on that. Patrick Peterson had a lot of interceptions last year for that Minnesota defense. I still believe he'll probably play better more with his mind rather than his body, meaning he's just going to he's not going to be as fast. He's not going to be man-to-man playing press, locking up people no more. He's not like that, but he'll still be a solid veteran presence there for those younger players, the Corey Trices, the Joey Porter Jr.'s. So that brings us to our middle linebacker position, which is my biggest question for this team. Led by Cole Holcomb, Atlanta Roberts, Nick Kwiatkowski, and then we're probably going to be having Keanu Neal in a hybrid type of dime package role there for pass coverage. Nope, no good pass coverage linebackers here, just mainly run stoppers. Cole Holcomb's a solid athletic type of guy, but I really believe this is going to be A big question mark heading into the season is who's going to be that pass coverage type of linebacker. Or are they just going to play a dime backer there with a safety? Interesting to see how that goes. So I really think middle linebackers, they'll have questions. So I got to see them finishing second, though they can finish first. Just all depends on who my first team is. And I think second and first, vice versa, Bengals, Steelers for me. I'm going to pick the Bengals to finish first because of a few things. One, they're a more proven team. They didn't make as many good acquisitions as we did. They actually lost a few players. Though I still like Joe Burrow as a top 2 quarterback in this league. I think he's the second best quarterback behind Mahomes. Joe Mixon's a solid running back. Their offensive line leaves a lot to be desired, but getting Orlando Brown was a huge addition to that squad. As their offensive line, to me, it just sucks. I'm sorry. You're going to get Burrow killed if you all don't fix that. You still have Jamar Chase, who is an emerging receiver. Top 5 receiver in this league, no question. You could argue that. Top 3, you could argue. Though he's probably in my top 5. Top 3 is very debatable. T. Higgins, who is like a top 12, top 15 receiver. Probably the best wide receiver, too. Though you could argue Jalen Waddle's the best wide receiver, too. It's one of those two. Then you got Tyler Boyd, who's been a great Pittsburgh product for them. Slot receiver, ever since he's been drafted. Solid, consistent. They lose Hayden Hurst, so I'm not sure their tight end's going to be. Subtractions on defense. You lose Jesse Bates, who was a pretty good underrated safety for them for a long time, honestly. So Daxton Hill from Michigan, former first-round pick, is going to step up for them. They also drafted DJ Turner out of Michigan. And they drafted defensive end Murphy. I want to say his name was Murphy from, who's an edge player. Edge player, good, solid edge player. You got Trey Hendrickson there. You still got Sam Hubbard. Still got solid players there. Their defense has always been underrated. Not led by superstars, but just well coached. You know, doesn't allow the big play. Everything in front of them, good tackle. They just have a solid defense. Not super good, but a solid defense. It's just comical to me when people put them far and above the rest of this division, because this division, nonetheless, will be close. I believe 3 teams can come out of this division as playoff squads. You could argue all 4, literally. You could make the case for all 4 teams why they could be in the playoffs if Deshaun Watson resurges. For the Ravens, if Lamar Jackson reverts to MVP form. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, Kenny Pickett makes a year 2 leap. And if Joe Burrow and the Bengals, you know, it's hard to see them slipping unless injuries happen. Bengals first, Steelers second, Ravens third, Browns last. So I think that'll do for today's episode of the Blitzburgh Coverage Podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And we are on the start of something great. Keep it here with me. If you love NFL football, keep it here with me. If you love the Steelers, stay with me. We're out here for a long journey. We're in the off season, baby. We're going to do this thing. We're going to do it right. We got like 8 weeks, 9 weeks until the best time of the year. Let's get it, y'all. That's it for episode 1. Don't forget to subscribe. Give the video a thumbs up. And fellow Steelers fans, y'all better get ready. Get freaking ready, man. It's going to be a great season. Let's get this thing popping. Make sure you grab your towel. Get that ready. We're waving this thing. We out here, y'all. This is Kurt. We're heading out. Adios.